having a look at what's happening on social media. So let's cross now to Anne Devigneau. So what reactions have you been seeing this evening?
Good evening, everyone. Well, the participation rate seems to be down, but on the social networks, what we've seen a great deal are calls for people to go vote with the hashtag #IamVoting. I'm not saying, of course, who people are voting for, because obviously I do not know that, but everybody has been calling on everyone to vote. Some are saying who they are voting for, and we'll have those official results in a few moments. The results we will like to publish are long queues outside polling stations. Some people have queued for several hours. One person said she queued for several hours. And some people are also saying these queues are proof that people aren't participating. Our specialist journalist is talking about this. He says people are talking about plotting. There's been disinformation circulating on the internet. To round off what I'm saying, let me refer to a quote from Edouard Morin, the philosopher. Let's hope that we will not need to despair. End of quote. A sentence that says we have a lot of information ahead of us. Thank you very much. We'll come back to us in a little later in the evening. The first estimates for
this election will be here in just a few moments. Let's go back to the studio.
For those of you just joining us, this is Euronews' special coverage of the French election. The French have been voting in the first round of presidential elections after a campaign that's been overshadowed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We know 49 million people are eligible to decide which 2 of 12 candidates should partake in the runoff vote later this month.
And as we can see here from our live shot in Paris, in about 2 minutes, polls will be officially closing in metropolitan France. And we should have the first exit polls, the official exit polls, which should give us a projection of how the actual results will be coming in. Of course, stay tuned with us here at Euronews for those projections and also for the actual results as they come in later in the evening as we await who is going to go to the second round out of the 12 candidates at play.
Now, we know exit polls generally give a good indication of which 2 candidates are set to qualify for the second round off, which will take place on April 24. Those exit polls will be updated throughout the evening based on preliminary vote counts. France is heading, or has been heading, for a higher voter abstention in its presidential election. Higher than 2017 figures have. But for now, we'll take you to France Television.
En tête ce soir, Emmanuel Macron avec 28,1%.
Emmanuel Macron has 28.1% of the vote, ahead of Le Pen's vote. As you can see here, the 2 main headquarters have erupted into joy. In third position, we've got Jean-Luc Melenchon at just over 20%. Next after that is Eric Zemmour. After that, we've got the candidate from the Republicans, Valérie Pécresse, and Yannick Jadot on 4.4% for the Green Ecology Party. Jean Lassalle on 3.3%. Fabien Roussel is next on 2.7%. Nicolas Dupont-Aignan is on 2.3%. and Anne Hidalgo on 2.1% from the Parti Socialiste. And lastly, the two far left candidates, Nathalie Arnaud, 0.8%, and Philippe Poutot on 0.7%. Let's head to the two headquarters now of the candidates on first position. It looks like it's going to be, based on the projections, a battle between, again in 2017, Le Pen and Macron. As you can see, everyone's ecstatic. As you can imagine, people have exploded with joy. Here is Emmanuel Macron's camp. And you can hear everyone shouting and screaming and waving their flags. They're all shouting, Macron president. These are live scenes from the headquarters of the Republic En Marche, Mr. Macron's headquarters for the night. And the official exit poll from France Television has come out, which has placed him ahead of his main rival, Marine Le Pen. If you're just joining us now live, we're at the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron, the outgoing president who's been predicted by the official exit polls to be ahead, winning the first round in terms of the amount of votes cast, ahead of his rival Marine Le Pen. Both of those candidates will now likely go to a second round of voting on April the 24th.
A massive amount of noise behind me. It would seem that everybody is relieved by the announcement of these results. If you just heard us before, France TV has placed Emmanuel Macron ahead. We have our first graphic with Emmanuel Macron sitting at 28.1%, followed by Marine Le Pen at 23.3%. These are live scenes from Macron's headquarters in Versailles. Clearly, in a static crowd, they're chanting Macron for president, Macron president. That's what they're all shouting here. And these are the first exit polls that we've received in the first round of the France presidential election.
Based on these projections, it seems that the gap predicted between Emmanuel Macron and his main challenger, Marine Le Pen, is wider than expected. Some polls, unofficial kind of exit polls in Switzerland and Belgium, which isn't obviously subject to French law, came out putting them basically at neck and neck. One from Belgian media at 24% and 24% for the two candidates. If these projections do come out to be true, as we take in the results later in the evening, Emmanuel Macron is 5% ahead of his main challenger, Marine Le Pen. And as you can see from his headquarters, his daughters are ecstatic at that result. It's a reasonably clear lead. Of course, this means that the main challenger, Marine Le Pen, has qualified for the second round of voting, which is on the 24th of April, with the incumbent president, with the President Emmanuel Macron. And other candidates who were in the contention, really, Jean-Luc Melenchon, his supporters will be very, very disappointed. He had a surge of recent support just before the vote, but it seems like it wasn't enough to get to that all-important second place to advance to the runoffs. And here, as you can see, at Mr. Macron's headquarters, the crowd have erupted into the French national anthem, Le Marseillaise, based on the fact that he is 5 percentage points predicted ahead of his main rival. Let's cross that now back to the studio.
Française. Vous avez découvert en direct les premiers résultats partiels.
So you've discovered live the initial results. Without any surprise, Emmanuel Macron, the outgoing president, is ahead of Marine Le Pen. So as in 2017, we're heading for a new confrontation between the candidates in the second round. Annelise Borges is with us from the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron's party. He's the winner of this first round. Annelise, good evening. How have these results been analysed? How are people reacting?
Good evening, Julian. You said no surprise, but at least here it felt like a surprise. Everyone was effectively expecting a surprise. So when it was discovered that Macron was ahead, and when we saw those first estimates on the evening, clearly Emmanuel Macron is ahead of Marine Le Pen. And in the second round, a lot of people here are saying this evening will be very, very difficult. They expected that Emmanuel Macron's score this evening would not be as high as it is this evening. He joined the campaign later on than expected, and he told French citizens that he would actually be a candidate quite a lot later on. He wrote a letter to the French saying he wouldn't be able to campaign given the context in Ukraine. He said it was extremely busy with the war in Ukraine. The French president had only one meeting, one form of direct contact with French citizens before this vote. And during this meeting, he talked about the danger of the extremes, about hatred as well. And he had said that the impossible was becoming the possible, that it was important to block this without blaming his rival directly, Marine Le Pen. So Emmanuel Macron invited everybody to get on board and support him and vote against Marine Le Pen. As you can see, everyone here this evening feels really relieved. It's a positive score. There was a bit of doubt in the crowd over the last week of the campaign. But with Macron in first position, it's excellent news for all of his supporters here.
So Emmanuel Macron is ahead with over 20% of the votes. We'll now go to the headquarters of the National Rally. We have Cyril Fournier. We imagine that these supporters are smiling after these results. They must no doubt be happy. It is a good score for Marine Le Pen.
Yes, good evening, Julien. You're absolutely right. Everyone is really euphoric here this evening. As you can see in the eastern part, these people are singing the French national anthem and singing for joy at these provisional results. As you can see the smiles on different people's faces, on activist faces. They're all gathered here, and they were sure that Marine Le Pen was going to advance to the second round, and they now know it's likely to be the case with 20% of the votes, 23% of the votes, based on the estimates. However, it wasn't a foregone conclusion. The campaign for Marine Le Pen has been difficult. There's been a lot of traps for her out there. The war in Ukraine has not necessarily been a very easy subject for her in the past. She has shown her admiration for Vladimir Putin. She had to change her position, and she had to explain that she had changed her mind in light of the war in Ukraine. On the subject of Russia as well, there's been the Eric Zemmour phenomenon. The right-wing polemicist has become very, very popular and was essentially on Marine Le Pen's hunting ground, focusing on immigration, security, and of course in this context Marine Le Pen had to refocus her campaign on other themes such as purchasing power, and this is relatively new for her. But this is what the militant activists have been have been saying. This is what allowed Le Pen's vote to increase, and she has achieved the highest score ever by her party in the first round in the presidential election. So Julien, that's our analysis at the moment. Look at the atmosphere here. Everyone here is euphoric and shouting with joy, smiling broadly, and if I look at the east of Paris right now, where we are.
Thank you very much, Cyril there from the headquarters of the National Rally. We'll come back to him a little bit later on. We're now going to meet Olivier Piquet in Paris, where we have all of the militant activists for Melenchon there. A good result for him there, but defeat nevertheless.
Good evening, Julien. Good evening, everyone. Yes, it's true. When the results were announced earlier, everyone here at Melenchon's headquarters was disappointed. The disappointed was clear. The climate was quite morose. But let me say, given that I've followed several presidential races, it's very clear that when in the headquarters everything's bubbling over, but that wasn't really the case here this evening. Since I arrived here, it wasn't the case. So clearly the heads of the party, the managers of the party, were doing the best to smile. But they're clearly very, very disappointed. They're disappointed that they're probably not qualifying for the second round of the elections. Jean-Luc Melenchon described to us, he said he got going slowly, but he was climbing in the polls. And I think he believed that he would make it to the second round. Clearly that's not the case, but nevertheless, this is something that we need to really underscore. There is a bit of satisfaction here in the minds of militant activists. Jean-Luc Melenchon did do better than last time round in 2017. He says he is the left-wing man, and thanks to his leadership in the left wing of French politics, we can continue to make progress. But we need a few more percent, several thousand votes, obviously, to get there next time.
Thank you, Olivia Piggy, for that. Annelise Bourgeois will come back to you all a little bit later to get more details up to date. So, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen have qualified for the second round of the French presidential elections. There's another important score to note, which is abstention, which has been continually rising since 2017. It's a sign of loss of interest and mistrust in French political leaders, particularly amongst young people who feel like their voices are not being heard. So these young people are involved and concerned, but they're not voting. So here's a special report.
Turnout is a major issue in the French presidential election. Polls show that interest in the election has been steadily declining, especially amongst the youth. However, are they really disengaged? Here in Paris, a few days before the election, these young people preferred to march for action on climate change rather than attend the candidates' meetings. Politics is not really their thing. If we're here today, it's because we don't believe in it, unfortunately. We have trouble believing in it. In any case, our expectations are beyond that. I don't believe in words. I believe in action. They have been promising us things for 5 years, and frankly, we haven't seen anything. During this election, there has not been a word about the environment or very little said about it, and the urgency is here. It's now. In parallel to ecology, I believe it is important to fight against inequalities, to support minorities, whether it be gender or ethnic minorities. What if politicians and young people just do not understand each other anymore? This is one of the conclusions of sociologist and historian Marc Lazare, co-author of a study on young people in France. We can see very clearly that they have a number of very important concerns. First of all, the environment. 90% of them consider that it is quite or very important. They are also very mobilized on issues related to hunger in the world, on violence against women, sexist violence. These are subjects that really concern them, but they don't really see themselves in the political offer, in the political parties. And the most striking thing is that, while 90% of them are mobilized on environmental issues, only 11% say they are interested in the Green Party. So there is a considerable gap. According to another study by the Jean Jaurès Foundation, only a little more than half of the 18 to 24 age group say they are certain to vote, compared to 80% of those over 70. If we are indeed heading towards a significant abstention rate, there could be a significant generational gap between the person who will win the presidential election and these young people who are evolving in a society which has been marked by the COVID epidemic. They have suffered from COVID and they do not recognize the way in which society is organized politically, and that can be a sign of strong tensions to come during the next 5 years. Traditionally, the French turnout rate is the highest for the presidential election. In the first round in 2017, 78% of citizens voted, a slight decrease compared to the two previous presidential elections. France's record abstention rate in the first round of a presidential election dates back to 2002. The French remember it as it was the first time that the far right reached the second round. A few days before the election, many analysts agree that this record could be broken this year. Cyril Fourneris, Euronews, Paris.
Spécial consacré à l'élection présidentielle française. Comme en 2017,
Welcome back to the first round of the French presidential election. We're headed for a second round between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. Another important result is the abstention rate, which is up around 26%. So we will hear more from our analyst. Hello, Christophe. So abstention has been continually rising since 2017 in France.
You're quite right, Julien. The turnout shows that many people haven't voted. It's down once again. This means that at the same time that abstention has risen. So the pollsters have been saying this for some weeks now, that there was a lot of interest in this election. So this is the key figure this evening, 26.2%. That is the abstention rate. That's 13 million people who decided not to vote today. And so that rate, it wasn't as high as in 2002, but here you can see the trend. It was 28.4% in 2002, and people will remember that this was an electoral disaster, which saw Jean-Marie Le Pen, the father of the current Le Pen, qualify for the second round. And now, if you can see, if you look back, the abstention rate in 2007 was quite low. It collapsed to 16.2% because of the left-wing voters were remobilized. They didn't really want the same type of disaster in their eyes in the previous election. And then we see, as of 2012, we see its abstention rate rising a bit. And then there was yet another increase in 2017, 22.23%. And this continues to worsen. As we've seen in this year, it's gone even higher. So, what will voters do in the second round? That's now the big question that many French people were hoping that it wouldn't be the same rematch as in 2017. Particularly, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's voters will matter quite a bit. They are unhappy to be confronted with the exact same choice as in 2017 in the second round. So, will their anti-Macronism weigh on their vote, or will their anti-Le Penism weigh on their vote? And what will be the abstention rate again?
Thank you
so much, Christophe, and we'll come back to you for further analysis throughout the evening. Now let's hear from the socialist leader who has lost. Valérie Pécresse.
I think that our program is the right program for France. After the immobilism of the previous presidency, we need to restore order and rebuild. That is why the traditional right, present in all territories, we mustn't give up, and we can't give up our values. We must continue to be determined for the legislative elections which will be held shortly. The second round of the presidential elections will once again be a face-off between Macron and Le Pen. I'm very concerned for the future of our country. The far right has never been so close to winning any election. Emmanuel Macron, he played with fire by not attending the debates, and we might all pay the price for that. As you all know, my political commitment has always been against the extreme right, and we have continued to fight in that way. And I believe that the old President Jacques Chirac, that all people in their hearts are against extremism. Marine Le Pen will drive our country to discord and collapse. Her connections with Vladimir Putin discredit her. She won't be able to defend our country in the hardest of times, and France will disappear from a European and an international stage. And though there are many die-hard supporters, I will vote for Emmanuel Macron to block the chaos that we are guaranteed if Marine Le Pen wins the election.
Je l'ai dit, je ne suis pas propriétaire des suffrages qui se sont portés sur mon nom.
As I have said, I do not need the votes that were for me, but for the voters who trusted me with their votes. I ask them if they take very, very strongly the potential disaster if they choose to vote differently from what I've just told you is my intention is to vote for Mr. Macron. We must defend our identity and our values. And I say to the French people that I love you with a great passion, that my political commitment remains intact. I will always fight to improve your lives. I'll use all my force to defend you and a certain idea of France. Long live France. If you're joining us now, that was the leader of the Republican Party, the right-wing Republican Party, Valérie Pécresse, who has just conceded her first round defeat, saying that her supporters should now vote for Mr. Macron.
We're now bringing you live photos from Macron HQ. Good evening and welcome to Euronews' special coverage of the French presidential election. I'm Charlotte Lamb and with me is Raoul San. The first exit polls are in and they show Emmanuel Macron has gathered 28.1% of the votes in the first round of voting, while his rival Marine Le Pen has received 23.3% of the votes. Now, earlier we saw Macron's fans gathering with joy. They were singing the national anthem. Now they're quietly waiting to hear from the man himself. But it's also important to note that the abstention rate was also a very important result in this evening's, and it will likely prove crucial in this election.
Yes, we saw the abstention rate in this first round being the highest since 2002, which was a high point due to a very stark choice faced by voters from the incumbent president and right-wing president Jacques Chirac and the extreme nationalist candidate party, which was actually the father of the current Marine Le Pen. Just a few minutes ago, we heard from Valérie Pécresse. She is the presidential candidate of the Republican Party, the right-wing party, and she told her supporters to vote for Macron in the second round, urging them to vote against the far right and against Marine Le Pen.
Now we'll take you live to the Green candidate.
Vitaux pour notre pays, vitaux pour nous et nos enfants, ont été largement ignorés dans cette campagne.
The calls for our country, our children, have been ignored. This campaign was confiscated, and we must grow from this. Equality will be absent from the second round of voting. It cannot be absent from the next presidential term. And this is why we must, very quickly, as of the legislative elections, we must react.
et la biodiversité.
This is a vital urgency, a fight for diversity and to prevent climate change. We must also consider all these threats to democracy here and across Europe. We must move beyond a society and political leaders that are not paying attention to these challenges. We must demand more social justice and equality. I know that the historic mission of the Green parties has been to engage in France on this path. And I believe that this legislative elections will be an opportunity for us. And the Green Party needs your support and needs your financial support to continue our campaigns and our efforts. So please go to our website to make a donation. We will not give up. I will not give up. The state of the country demands this. This evening, we must accept responsibility without ambiguity for these results. The equality is the Republic. I call on all Green voters to block the far right. I call on Green voters to block the far right by voting for Emmanuel Macron on April 24th. No one should minimize the threat of the far right, the threat to our democracy and our values, and for our environment. But I say to the incumbent Emmanuel Macron, our vote does not give you the right to ignore the environment and do the environment damage by inaction. We're hearing here from candidate Yannick Jadot in his defeat speech.
Il vaut encore moins soutien au projet qu'il a esquissé.
Our votes are not to be taken as support for many of your points of program. You must bring together the French people, but I do call on our voters to block the far right. And for the battle of our survival and the environment will continue. It is our duty to do so. I want to thank you again, and long live the Green Party and long live the Republic.
So that was the ecologist candidate Yannick Jadot conceding that he will not be advancing to the second round. Interestingly, like his right-wing rival Valérie Pécresse, he urged his supporters in the second round to vote against the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen and vote for Emmanuel Macron and the République en Marche, the Republic on the Move, to block the far right from getting in power. He appeals to his voters to say that they should not be naive of the risk of electing a far right president in France. But he also said that in giving Emmanuel Macron their votes, he should not forget of the importance of the ecology, of the environment, and of climate change effectively, and that this, while he will ask his supporters to support Emmanuel Macron, Macron must do more on climate change. He must do more on tackling the global crisis that we face. And as you can see there, we're bringing you live pictures from the headquarters in Paris, and it was the second concession speech we've seen so far after that of the Republicans candidate Valérie Pécresse.
Yes, in the Republican conceding speech just moments ago, she said she was scared for the future of this country. She said the far right was the closest it had ever been to winning. And as you've just heard, these are the first exit polls. We have Emmanuel Macron has garnered 28.1%.
So let's just have a recap. As we say from this exit poll, Macron is on 28.5%, and his main rival is now probably going to advance to the second round. Marine Le Pen of Le Rassemblement National is on 23.6%. That's further apart than some polls had been suggesting in the run-up to this vote. Actually, some exit polls in Switzerland and Belgium had been suggesting something that's made for great joy in the Republic en Marche's headquarters in Paris. But we've also seen scenes of joy and happiness at Marine Le Pen's camp as well in the east of Paris, as she's now advanced to the second round for the second time. Crucially, on third place, Jean-Luc Melenchon, in his third attempt for the presidency, has not had enough votes. We can see here some of the other candidates: Valérie Pécresse, the candidate from the right-wing Republicans, Yannick Jadot from the Ecology Party, and these candidates will also be quite upset. I mean, Valérie Pécresse was polling at 1 point higher than Le Pen only 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now she's been relegated to somewhat of the second tier in terms of the exit polls. And here are some of the other candidates as well. Anne Hidalgo being quite a well-known one, the current mayor of Paris, and the head of the Parti Socialiste, one of the main left-wing parties. And just as you can see here on the screen, a record abstention rate, the highest since 2002, 26.2%. And we're now hoping to soon bring you pictures and speeches from Macron. Let's have a look at Emmanuel Macron, the man himself.
Five years ago, age 39, Emmanuel Macron became the youngest French president ever elected. He promised to renew political life and overcome the left-right divide. 5 years later, the image of the former minister, close to the socialists, has changed. His term in office has been marked by a number of challenges, including that of the Gilets jaunes, a populist movement inspired by rising fuel costs in 2018, and sometimes accused of being racist and far-right. In a country weakened by 2 years of a global pandemic, there's a degree of disillusionment for those who hoped for social and ecological changes. Environmental groups say that in this regard he has been found wanting. The incumbent president entered the electoral campaign late, as his role as mediator in the conflict reinforced his presidential stature, benefiting in the polls from what some people called the rally around the flag effect. But as the election approached, concerns about domestic politics and above all about purchasing power have taken over. And as the re-election campaign nears its end, a row has emerged over the government's use of private advisors. During one of his first meetings, only a week before the first round, he warned against the contamination of the debate by the far right.
We've become complacent, but the extremist danger today is all the greater because for several months, no, several years, hatred and alternative truths have become trivialized in the public debate.
5 years ago, Emmanuel Macron said he wanted to do everything possible to prevent further need to vote for the extremes. But 5 years later, he's holding off a far-right surge.
Marine Le Pen's headquarters, who has qualified for the second round of the French presidential elections. Over the next 2 weeks, I hope the French citizens will be able to choose to vote for the second round of these elections. During the course of this election, I have decided to be free, to not take any sides, so that I am able to speak directly to you, the voters, you, the citizens. I will continue to do so. So for the second round, you can make your decision based on everything I say. I wish to be the president of all French citizens. What will be important on the 24th of April is not just the fact that you can vote, but you can choose a society and a civilization that you want for the future. Your vote will be able to be a vote that will cover the whole of France, that will value the importance of French culture, our region, our way of life, the Republican values that you wish to defend above all else, secularity, and of course equality between men and women. And I stress, your vote will guarantee that we can enable all those people who are in society to not suffer by the hands of those in capitalism. I'm talking about the importance of solidarity for those who are most vulnerable. Everybody needs to have their rights respected, and they need to have the right to a pension. On the 24th of April, above all, we will make decisions after that date. What you have voted for is for the next 5 years. You have voted for the economic policy, the migration policy, the social policy, the European policy, and also the diplomacy policy. I want to ensure that France becomes a peaceful nation. I will restore sovereignty in all areas, and in other words, French people will be able to decide for themselves and defend their interests. I will focus on immigration, and I will re-establish safety, security for everybody. By listening to citizens, I will guarantee each individual that they are respected. These are citizens who have nobody has listened to over the last 5 years. Above all, I will be open and honest and will tell you what challenges we are up against and what solutions I will find for you, always providing accurate figures. Above all, I want to be able to cure French society from all its evils, all these problems that have not been solved. Territorial, factual, digital, medical. I will get France going. I will put France back on the map so that we play a role in this 21st century, a role full of promise, opportunity, because what is important is that we turn this situation around, that we have great ambitions for this country, referendums, for example, so all political opinions can be expressed, and so at last they can all be represented. It is important for us to have ecological ambitions. The crowd has interrupted Marine Le Pen now. They're all shouting, "We have won, we have won." She continues, "Our ambition will be ecological and also economical, and we will ensure jobs at all levels. Thanks to support we will provide to small and medium-sized companies. I want work to be central to all of our lives, and I want everybody to be able to play a role. We have a social ambition, the right to an education, the right to moving up the social rights of society, a good pension. Everybody has to have access to this. Our country must be proud that it will not abandon any of its children. We must guarantee equality for all, education for all, so that everyone can be happy in their family environment. We need to look after our country, all of our citizens. We need to protect our reputation, pay attention to everything that takes place in our country. We need to be protective, fair, and in the eyes of everyone, we need to be a strategic state that serves the nation, that's in the right place at the right time. Above all, my ambition is to bring France on the map, put France on the map, and create a project that strengthens the links between generations and encourages young people, that will encourage us to become a great community, a great nation, and France will once again become a country that is rich and great. As of today, I would like to call on all of the French, whether you're on the right or the left, French people from all horizons, please join the great popular rally, and together, enthusiastically, we will guarantee victory. victory that will enable us to bring about the change that France needs. And we will all be happy to take this country into the third millennium. Long live the French Republic, long live France. There we just heard from far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, who has also qualified alongside Emmanuel Macron in the second round of French presidential elections. She talked about putting France back on the map, and she said she wants to give France an identity again and make it a rich country. There are her supporters. They're shouting, "Le Pen has won, Le Pen has won, and we're taking you now." And we return to Marine Le Pen. She says, "Together we will build and develop enthusiastically this victory so we're able to implement the great changes that France needs so that happily all of us can take the country into the third millennium. Long live the French Republic, long live France." Her supporters there cheering.
And now let's cross to Jean-Luc Melenchon. So, there's a new page opening on our combat.
Vous l'aborderez, nous l'aborderons.
A new page.
Dans la fierté du travail.
Or rather, we will deal with this knowing that we can be proud of the work that we've already accomplished. Proud that we've already built some very sturdy and sound foundations. Despite the fact that there was a great deal of mistrust and insults out there, very clearly, we have made progress. And let me stress that if you decide to preserve and protect what we have created in the same way that you protected and preserved that what you've achieved up until now, in Marseille, the sunlight was reflecting off the beautiful seas off the coast of Marseille. And this morning, I was getting ready to come to this event, of which I did not know the outcome. But soon I will start to hear the echoes from the French borders with Brazil, and with Martinique, and with Guadeloupe, and with Réunion Islands.
Dès le premier tour,
as of the first round of the presidential elections, everybody has voted, and when I visited these overseas territories, France's overseas territories, I could fully understand how they felt about the situation for their country, for their citizens. I could see so many people who felt that there was a state of emergency from a social and ecological side. And once more, we're seeing it from this side. We have a political state of emergency as well. Look at the figures that you are seeing on the screen. Look at the figures you're seeing in front of you. We did not want this to be the case. French citizens did not want this to be the case. But it's the institutional organizations and the straight balloting system that has given this result, where you're being asked to choose between two evils, and you can sense that they are dreadful for you as individuals, but they're dreadful in two different ways. And each and every one of you are now back against the wall, having to make a decision. What decision should you make? That of the human condition, that of being ceaselessly confronted with decisions that are very difficult to make. Well, what happened last time? I said to you what I might say to you again. I know how angry you are, dear citizens. I've spoken with you all just a few seconds ago. I'm aware that you're very, very angry. Please do not make a mistake. That could be sustainably damaging to all of us as French citizens. For as long as life continues, our combat must continue. And it is my duty to say to you here and now that as I am the oldest person among you, the only task that we have ahead of us is the task that has been accomplished in the past. When a stone falls to the bottom of a ravine, what do? You pick up the stone and you carry it up the mountain. You are strong. You are ready to lead this battle. And this battle, the next one, and all the battles that will follow. I have never given up. I've never given in. I have never looked to the floor. And this is the way forward. This is what's enabled us to come as strong as we are. So now it's over to you. There is a battle that's now forthcoming. We now have a popular set of foundations because so many people have come together and vote and bring us as far forward as we are now. The battle is now ahead of you. Let us not make the mistake of going off track. Now that we're on this main road forward, we know who we will never vote for. And for the rest, as I've said to you 5 years ago, please do remember that there was some damage after our declaration. I believe everybody is capable of knowing what they need to do, what is good for the country. We will never lose our trust in democracy. Hence, you should not vote for Mrs. Le Pen, Marine Le Pen. I know full well, and I will repeat this, and must repeat this, and it's sometimes as if I say something, it's like I haven't said anything. Let me start all over again. You must not give a single vote to Madame Le Pen. You must not give a single vote to Mrs. Le Pen. You must not give a single vote to Marine Le Pen. And there you are. I think this message for this part has been heard loud and clear. So now, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to open up the page, and all of the people who have provided me with their sponsorship will make up their minds. This being said, let us fully accept how disappointed we are, how violent this form of disappointment can be. And so first of all, let us first think about everything that could have been done and that will not be done. And more generally speaking, I know what I'm about to do. The wonderful teams that we have, the teams that were so ready to spread their wings in order to accomplish all of the tasks that we had been preparing for. Yes, we are disappointed, but nevertheless, at the same time, I'm exactly like you. How can we hide from the fact or not realize either how proud we can be for the work we've done? We now have this popular centre, this popular hub. If we hadn't done what we'd done, we wouldn't have anything. Whereas now, on the contrary, we have this strong movement which we had developed. So I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to all of you who are present right now this evening. I'm not going to look to reassure you or pat you on the back or give you naive smiles. I don't want to comfort you. I'm not feeling particularly happy, but I'm fully aware of my duty. And I would like you to understand that you have a duty. The fight continues the fight continues.
À tous ceux qui jusque-là n'ont pas voulu l'entendre.
I'm simply saying to all of those who didn't want to hear it before, this is where strength is. We have a strategy. We have this populist hub, this populist centre, and ahead of us, we will have other elections, and we will move forward at every stage that we will be present. And we will be present as we need to be. So let us think, the younger people among us are going to say, oh gosh, we've lost. We haven't yet achieved what we've supposed to have achieved. Well, next time round, just do better. Thank you. So that you were just hearing from the left-wing candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon conceding defeat, and now we'll cross back live to our studio in Lyon for more updates and analysis on the election.
La suite de notre soirée spéciale consacrée à l'élection.
So we continue our special evening of French elections. Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will go through to the next round. There'll be a new face-off, as they did in 2017. Emmanuel Macron, if he wins, will become the first French president to be re-elected for a second term of 5 years. 20 years after the switch of term.
On va retrouver dans le cube tout de suite Anne Devino pour savoir ce qu'il se dit sur les.
So now we're going to Anne Devino, who's going to tell us what's going on online. What are you seeing there?
Hello, Julien. So let's have a look at some of the first official reactions to the results. Let's start with the calls to block the Front National, that's the far-right party of Marine Le Pen. And on the side of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, you've just heard from, he said we will never vote for and we will never give a single vote to Madame Le Pen. And from the Socialist Party, a big loser this evening, and their candidate Anne Hidalgo, she said that France must not get into a state of hating each other. And she called on everyone to vote against the far right. And for the Green Party, Jadot called again to block the far right. And here's the reaction from Belgium. Former Belgian Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt, who said that Macron has won the first round, but the real battle has only begun. So that's what we have all so far from social media. And so we'll have more reactions from social media soon. Let's hear from Eric Zemmour. We'll now cross live to Eric Zemmour.
Dear friends, more than 2 million of you voted for me today. And I want to speak to you in particular, to thank you. An enormous thanks for your trust and your hope and the strength that you've given me through your vote. Thank you.
Grâce à vous, je peux faire une promesse. Je continuerai de défendre.
Thanks to you, I can make a promise to continue to defend France and our ideas. We're hearing cheers now for Eric Zemmour.
Et je suis certain que bientôt nous l'emporterons.
I am convinced that we will win soon. I would also like to thank you on behalf of France. I consider each of your vote as a cry of people who refuse to die.
Le fait que vous ayez été 2 millions à soutenir un homme parti de rien.
The fact that 2 million of you voted for a person who started from nothing shows that my message has been heard. This is a fundamental point that we must never forget, in coming days and years. Your voice will never be overlooked again. Regardless of the result of the second round of voting, everyone has understood that our ideas are stronger than our score today. I did not manage to convince enough of our fellow French people. And we know the majority of French people share the majority of our concerns and hopes. So why did they not vote? Perhaps due to the lack of debate, perhaps due to the treatment that we suffered, perhaps due to the international situation, and perhaps due to my own personal fault. People in the audience are shouting no right now. They're cheering for him. He continues. Thank you. I have committed mistakes, and I assume responsibility for those. I must thank my team for the success. They are not responsible for my failures. But at the end of this campaign, I can say I am proud that I have not become a politician. I have never lied to gain a point in the polls. I have never betrayed my thoughts or my values. In the coming days, you're going to hear many explanations as to why we lost, but I would like to talk about our successes. Thanks to you 2 million French people, nothing will ever be the same again thanks to you. I ask that you remain dignified and strong and keep faith. You have been admirable during this campaign, and your vote is a pioneer vote for the future. It's a vote for hope. It's a vote for hope because the truth that we have put forward in this campaign will be imposed on all in the coming years, will prevail in the coming years, rather. I would also like to thank from the bottom of my heart all the activists and my team. A huge thank you. Your energy, your devotion, your generosity, your organization, it's impressed all of France. I remember last May, when there were only 10 of us. It was just an idea. And we saw the terrible blockages and the political efforts and the terrible state of France and the old parties at the end of the line. We didn't know what laid ahead, but we felt that it was our duty to stand up, and I stood up. One year later, here we are. Once again, facing all the same faces. So if nothing changes, nonetheless, everything has changed. Everything has changed because we have made our mark on the electoral landscape. In just 3 months, we have done something that no politician has done in 15 years. We have built the largest party of France.
À mes côtés, une jeunesse s'est levée. Cette jeunesse.
By my side, young people have stood up to support me. They are here, they do not want to lose hope, and they have been waving their flags. They will never lower those flags.
Alors oui, nous sommes déçus.
So yes, we are disappointed. But we have won something in this campaign that has no price, and that's power and experience. We are strong. We have activists all over France. We have smart people with us, with unrivaled skills. And we are already projecting ourselves into the future. So I will not stop here. I will not give up until France has been reconquered.
Notre ligne a sa singularité et elle n'est représentée nulle part ailleurs.
So our political line cannot be found elsewhere.
Notre civilisation et notre identité dans la culture, à l'école.
We will defend our values and identity, and we'll take you now back to the studio for more on the French general election.
Soirée spéciale sur Euronews consacrée à l'élection présidentielle.
So, welcome back to our special evening for the French presidential elections. And no surprise that Macron will move to the second round, but also he's joined by Le Pen, Marine Le Pen. Now, even though the war in Ukraine has occupied people's minds, let's go to Brussels now and our correspondent, Grégoire Laurie, who has a guest speaker with him.
Responsable du bureau bruxellois de la Fondation Robert Schuman. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
Quelles conclusions les institutions européennes peuvent déjà tirer de ce premier tour de l'élection?
What are the conclusions
Bruxelles, le choix,
we can get from this election?
Les perspectives pour la France sont les mêmes que pour le second tour, c'est-à-dire Emmanuel Macron face à Marine Le Pen.
In Brussels, we see the same thing as in 2017. The big difference here is that Emmanuel Macron, the incumbent who's been representing France at the European Union for 5 years, has tried to move forward many European projects and programs. So if he's re-elected, there will be a good European continuity. So you can imagine that he's a preferred candidate of most European parties. And on the other hand, Marine Le Pen, who's now no longer talking about leaving the euro, there are certain elements that challenge France's commitments to the European Union. And so her potential election could represent a huge political problem from the European project.
Europe was a major part of the campaign, so do you think it will emerge again in the second round?
Well, we've known that the last time Marine Le Pen gave up on the idea of moving away from the euro, the currency, she had to give up on that idea. Now, of course, on that front, Emmanuel Macron has been in power for the last 5 years and is head of the head of the European Council. The European presidency is now with France, and Marine Le Pen is no doubt going to challenge what has been done. She's going to challenge what Mr. Macron has done in terms of the war in Ukraine. And so she could challenge him in many ways. But the key concern is purchasing power, which is a strong focus of Marine Le Pen, the purchasing of the power of France and French people, and the approval of the European Union. At the same time, what would she do without European financing? How would she reduce debt? And she's also promising controls on goods crossing the borders, which is entirely counter to European principles and how the EU works, as is how migration would work under her. So all of this will come up on the debate with Emmanuel Macron.
All of this, I'm sure, will come up with a debate. So the far right won a lot of votes. So what do you think of this scepticism, which is becoming firmly anchored in France?
Well, it's true that it's becoming firmly anchored. It's significant in France for sure. And this is a crisis period. We're just emerging from the pandemic, obviously, and growth is returning. And yet there's still tensions in the country. There's still a great deal of uncertainty. Rising energy prices, for example, not just in France, but for everyone. Food prices as well are rising. And so there's a lot of worry and anger in France that could have consequences at the European level if Marine Le Pen wins the presidency. But for now, we believe that the movement is in favor of Emmanuel Macron.
Now, the fact that Le Pen has softened her line, do you think she has drawn more voters and that it's true?
So it's true that she has changed her line and, for example, giving up the euro is now not her policy. And she's taken on a different style of communication to appear somewhat more presidential and less controversial, contrary to Eric Zemmour. And this is how she managed to beat out Zemmour 5 years ago, which she lost control in the debate and lost a lot of credibility before the second round against Macron in 2017. And so we'll see how she prepares around this time. She's going to have to prepare on the various issues. And also, what's her stance on certain realities? So, she's mentioned certain promises. But some of these promises must break from France's engagement to Europe.
Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us. So that's the analysis from Europe.
Thank you so much, Grégoire, from Brussels. And so now we'll go back to the newsroom for other reactions to this first round of the French presidential election.
Good evening and welcome to Euronews' special coverage of the French election. The first exit polls are in and they show Emmanuel Macron garnered 28.1% of the votes in the first round of voting, while his rival Marine Le Pen received 23.3% of the votes. We've also heard some 23.4 rather. We've also heard some conceding speeches, most recently from Jean-Luc Melenchon, who said the French people were forced to pick from two evils. But here we can see some live pictures from Macron's headquarters in Paris. We can expect to hear from him eventually, sometime soon. But in those conceding speeches, we did hear from Melenchon, who said the French people are now forced to pick from two evils. He called on them to not make a mistake and said not to vote for Le Pen. He said they are ready to lead this battle and they should be proud of the movement they created.
And from some of the other, thank you for that, Charlotte, some of the other speeches we've heard so far, it seems that most of the candidates have all appealed for their supporters to vote against Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National, the far-right party of Marine Le Pen, and vote for Emmanuel Macron. Except, of course, Eric Zemmour, who has just finished a conceding speech only a few minutes ago. He called for his supporters to vote for Madame Le Pen in the second round. Madame Le Pen and Eric Zemmour obviously being somewhat similar in ideology, but they're both from the far right, Zemmour being a new candidate in this election. But it seems we're kind of getting another taste of what we had in 2017. Most candidates, other than Eric Zemmour, are appealing for their voters now to vote against Marine Le Pen in the second round, to not let in the far right into power into France. Except for, of course, Eric Zemmour, who's appealed for his supporters to vote for Marine Le Pen. Now, whether they actually do is another question. most polls in predicting a second round match between Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron have the vote a lot more, the polls figures a lot more closer than the actual result in 2017, where Macron won by almost 20 points. So what will be different this time? Obviously, Macron is a known quantity. He's been president for 5 years. There's also the war in Ukraine complicating things, and a cost of living crisis, which Le Pen has really capitalized on, which has seen actually her support increase in the run-up to this vote. It's a topic that she's been campaigning quite a lot on, and it's something that has really been sounding with voters.
Yes, and we just did hear from Marine Le Pen there. She has been speaking, and she was calling for those who hadn't voted for Macron to vote for her in the second round, vowing to be a president for all people, to put France back on the map. She said she will address migration. She says she will create a strong economy. She says that everyone deserves a fair pension, and that these are all familiar themes. We've seen her campaign ahead of these polls, and she's been reasserting French values. Back to the studio.
And now let's continue our coverage. Let's go back to Paris. Let's go back to Cyril Forneries. He's at the headquarters of the National Rally. That's Marine Le Pen's the party. Let's go to him now.
I'm with David Racheli, Vice President of the National Rally. So what will the strategy be between these two rounds? How will you try and beat Macron?
Well, I think Emmanuel Macron's policy is ruining our country, and all of these people want to put an end to these policies. They'll come together alongside Marine Le Pen. She has a project to protect our compatriots, to protect our country. She wants to protect the nation and guarantee that we can show our love for our country in the face of Emmanuel Macron, who wants to abandon and destroy the country. So I think this difference is very, very clear, and we have to win the election. And of the people who are recommending a vote for Macron, that's irrelevant for our political perspective. Quite a few candidates have asked people that vote for us, but tonight it's like a totally new campaign is beginning. A new campaign will allow us to clarify our position on a range of subjects, to convince our compatriots that Marine Le Pen is the best project. Of course, it will take time, will take work, but we will be responsible.
About national policies. Marine Le Pen has said in the past that she admires Russia and Vladimir Putin over recent years. I get the opinion she's changed her mind over recent months. What is the relationship that they will have with Russia?
Things are very clear from that perspective. Madame Le Pen says we need to talk with all of the great powers of this world. Once mistakes are made by a certain number of them, it could be a case for Russia at the current time, that's the least we can say. Well, in that case, she is very clear on what she thinks. She says that her solidarity with Ukraine is 100% solid. And she totally disagrees with the idea of Russia being able to invade Ukraine. And in this perspective, things have been said and repeated. And if it hadn't been the case, I don't think the French people would have trusted Marine Le Pen and our national policy that she promises to adopt. So we have to continue with our diplomacy and ensure that peace comes back as soon as possible.
Thank you, sir. That is the Vice President of the National Rally. Thank you. Back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Cyril, from the headquarters of the National Rally in Paris. And we're now going to go to Annelise Borges, who's at the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron's party. Annelise, is Emmanuel Macron's party looking forward to this confrontation, this duel with Marine Le Pen?
Well, throughout the campaign, I would say we knew that Emmanuel Macron knew that this was a possibility, and the impression they're under today is that the battle is not over. The next 2 weeks will be very difficult, very hard, a great deal of work. That's what Emmanuel Macron said. They have a great deal of work to do. We spoke to a team member a few moments ago. We spoke about Emmanuel Macron's speech 5 years ago, where he said he would do everything in his power to avoid having to vote for the extremes ever again. But here we are, 5 years again, with the same confrontation. It's a bit disappointing, but the polls over recent weeks did suggest that this would be the case, and Emmanuel Macron and his team said very clearly that they are relieved by the score that they achieved tonight. They were looking to achieve 30%, but the score is lower than that and has been over recent weeks during the polls. But the president is now going to attempt to convince more French people to vote for him, notably on very practical subjects like daily life, purchasing power, for example. Emmanuel Macron had a very brief campaign. He only took part in one brief television program, and he said purchasing power would be his priority during the course of the campaign. So we will see how he will get on over the next few days. Here in his headquarters, we're looking forward to his speech. Emmanuel Macron, of course, who will follow on from all of the candidates. All of them have spoken, and the majority have asked for their support to vote for Emmanuel Macron, apart from Eric Zemmour. Most candidates have asked to block the far right. Let me just stress that everybody is waiting here. That's the kind of atmosphere. Everybody is looking forward to hearing from him. He should speak very shortly, but he has difficult days ahead of him.
Thank you very much, Annelise Borges, from the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron's party. We're now going to go back to Pierre, who's with the supporters of Jean-Luc Melenchon, who came third, as we said, third in this presidential election in the first round. What did you learn from Jean-Luc Melenchon's speech? What would you like to say about it?
Well, Julien, he spoke about a few points that I'd like to highlight from his speech. He repeated time and time again, the fight goes on, the battle goes on. He talked about hope, the window of hope that had risen, the wind of hope that had risen. He spoke to his activists. We admit that the disappointment is violent in French, and the militant activists expected better, and they thought they'd do better. So above and beyond the disappointment, he says the battle goes on, the fight goes on. What will the fight look like? I put that question to the head of his campaign, and he said they are future legislative elections, but they also need to be very watchful on the ground and in the streets, and this will continue over the next few months and over the next few years. From a short-term perspective, he repeated that it clearly they needed not to vote for Marine Le Pen. He said they would not vote for her. Nevertheless, he didn't ask for everyone to vote for Emmanuel Macron. He said, please do not give any votes to the far-right movement. That's the appeal he made, and he also indicated that he would consult the activists that supported him during this campaign, but the instructions were very clear, please do not vote for the far-right wing. So those are the impressions that reign here this evening. Disappointment, but the far left showed his great qualities of a great speaker. It was not a speech that was made by someone who was suffering by defeat, but a speech that was made by someone who was looking forward to the future.
Thank you very much, Olivier. No doubt we'll come back to you a bit later on. And that's from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, came third in these presidential elections. The voters hoped to attain other solutions to their concerns. Several studies showed that purchasing powers is one of the main concerns for French people, notably given the fact that inflation has risen sharply following the war in Ukraine. Let's have a look now at a report on this subject.
Like much of Europe, soaring food and energy costs are a top concern for many French voters ahead of the country's presidential poll. In the suburbs of Lyon, this so-called solidarity store sells products at a cheaper price, thanks to donations from individuals, food banks and supermarkets.
Our suppliers enable us to source products 30% below the average market price.
Those who come into the shop are selected according to their means. Most are either elderly or single mothers, like Aurélie, a mother of 3.
I have an 8-month-old son and I paid €2 for baby food instead of 4. I half my bill.
Avellino is 66. He joined France's Yellow Vest protest movement that rose up in 2018 in a bid to defend purchasing power.
We've ended up poor. I have €1,200 per month and now pay €600 for a 58 square metre flat. I've not been able to heat my home for 5-6 years. As a Gilets jaunes, I wanted to shake things up. I wanted things to change.
But has the purchasing power of the French really fallen? I put that question to economist Philippe Desatine.
From a statistical point of view, we're sure purchasing power has risen over the last 5 years. However, over the last few weeks or several months, we've experienced an extraordinary situation, totally different from the trend over the last few years. That's to say, a very strong resurgence in inflation that's completely perceptible for households.
The recent sanctions against Russia, Europe's leading oil and gas supplier, have only exacerbated the cost of fuel and other commodities that had already spiked because of COVID.
I usually pay €80 for a tank of petrol. Today I'm paying 140.
The rise in petrol prices is having a major impact on this transport company.
We are extremely worried for the future of the profession. Some hauliers will not survive. Today we pay more than €2 per litre for diesel. A truck consumes 31 litres per 100 kilometres. Do the calculation.
The French government recently cut the cost of fuel by 18 cents a litre. It's also given 6 million households a €100 energy voucher to cope with the spiralling energy costs.
Thanks for joining us on Euronews. We're taking you live to Paris, where we can expect to hear from French President Emmanuel Macron after the first exit polls are in. They've shown him with 28.4% votes in the first round of voting, while his rival Marine Le Pen received 23%. We've just heard some conceding speeches, most recently from the Greens candidate, the Republican candidate, the far left candidate. We also heard from Marine Le Pen, who promised to put France back on the map. And we also heard from Eric Zemmour, the extreme right anti-immigration candidate. He said that he was not a politician and admitted to making mistakes, but congratulated his supporters and encouraged everyone to vote for Marine Le Pen himself. And we also heard from Jean-Luc Melenchon, the far left candidate. He told his supporters that France now had to pick from two types of evils, but did encourage his supporters not to vote for the far right. And we'll take you back to Paris now, where we can expect to hear from the president himself any moment now.
And just a quick thing that's popped up now on our wire service. The Premier Secretary of the Socialist Party has called for a pact between the various parties and forces of the left for the legislative elections, their elections that are going to be held in the next few months, just after the presidential, or the second round of the presidential election, and they will determine the makeup of the French Parliament. That's the Chambers of Deputies and also the Senate as well. It's very important for deciding actually the lawmaking powers, where power lies and which parties are in effective government. And he's called to kind of have, without ambiguity, a system whereby left-wing forces coalesce and make sure that they have a strong voice in the parliament. He says, and I quote, "I am launching this evening a call for the forces of the left and the Greens of the social forces of citizens ready to engage finally to construct together a front for these elections, these legislative elections, a pact for justice, social justice, and the ecology as well." And as you can see here, they're live pictures from Le République En Marche's headquarters in Paris. incumbent President Emmanuel Macron is due to speak at any moment now. We're expecting him to give some comments. His supporters are in a jubilant mood. Polls just before the election showed Marine Le Pen, his main far-right challenger, narrowing his gap. He had a significant bounce in popularity after the war in Ukraine began earlier in February this year. That's now been almost all entirely eroded by his far-right candidate, far-right rival, I should say, Marine Le Pen. And now that's only 4 or 5 points between them if the opinion polls or if the exit poll is to be believed.
Now, the first round of this election was a highly anticipated contest, and now these two, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, will go on to the next election on April 24. But it is important to note abstention. That was also an equally important result that will likely play a major factor in this election. Turnout was at 65% by 5 p.m. this afternoon, and several points lower than what it was at that time in the last election in 2017. Now, several candidates we've heard from so far have called on their supporters to vote against the far right in the runoff election on April 24. The French president is afforded more powers than other European presidents, so this is an incredibly important contest for leadership of Europe's second largest economy.
And I think that kind of gets to the heart of the matter, really. How large is abstention going to be in the second round? I think it was very telling from Jean-Luc Mélenchon's, the left-wing candidates, far left-wing candidates, speech after the exit poll came out. He phrased the battle, the choice that now faces France, basically as a choice between two evils, as he described it. And that isn't a very strong motivating line to make people, or his supporters at least, go and vote for Macron, even though he told them they should vote against the far right. How many of them are actually going to do that, and will it be enough to stop Le Pen? Okay, now let's cross back away from the headquarters in Paris, back to the studio.
So we continue our special evening of the French presidential elections. So as you've seen, it's Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen for the second round in 2 weeks' time. So what's going on social media? Let's hear from Anne Devenot.
So, let's have a look at some of the official reactions of some of the losing candidates, who are mostly calling to block the Rassemblement National and not give one single vote to the far right, to Le Pen. As Melenchon said, the radical leftist candidate said, we know who we're not voting for. And he said, the French people know what's good for democracy. What about the reactions from around Europe? Well, first of all, the MEP Udo Bullmann, the German Social Democrat MEP, said that France is at a crossroads, and it's only by unifying our forces that we can stop far-right extremists. As for another European MEP, I should say, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, Guy Verhofstadt, who also calls to block the far right. And he says the real battle is only really getting started. To keep Putin, that's the Russian President, Putin, out of the Élysée Palace. And what about Marine Le Pen's allies? Up here we have Matteo Salvini, the head of the League Party in Italy, who congratulated Marine Le Pen. He says, good job. We are very happy for your success, and we wish you the best of luck for the second round. That's it for now.
Thank you so much. So now let's go back to the newsroom for more reactions to the results. And for those of you just joining us, We're showing you live pictures from Paris, where we're expecting to hear from President Emmanuel Macron, who is going through to the second round.
And as you can see, the mood is very expectant here. I mean, Macron has yet to speak, and most of his other main rivals have. Madame Le Pen has spoken to an exuberant crowd in the east of Paris. We've had conceding speeches from Jean-Luc Melenchon, quite a fiery concession speech, it must be added. We've also had concession speeches from the other far-right candidate, Eric Zemmour, as well. We've also had speeches from the Socialist Party candidate, the Green candidate, and now really all of the attention is focused here in Paris on what the incumbent President Emmanuel Macron will say. As we've said previously, his projected lead over Marine Le Pen, 5 percentage points roughly, is bigger than some early exit polls from other countries like Belgium and Switzerland had put him on. His supporters will be clearly very, very happy with that. But now, really, all attention is turning to the second round of this election, which will be on April the 24th. How many people will abstain from the vote? How many disgruntled voters of, say, the left-wing candidate Jean-Luc Melenchon will just vote for neither candidate? How close will ultimately the result be?
That's right. Now, the second round of the campaign does start tomorrow, and much will depend on how the 47% or so voters who did not cast their ballots for either Emmanuel Macron or Marine Le Pen in the first round decide how they will decide to vote on April 24. At present, only Eric Zemmour, who scored 7%, has called on his supporters to back Le Pen. All other candidates but one have clearly are calling on their supporters to back Macron, but it is important to note that the Greens party candidate, Yannick Jadot, he said that diversity and environment will be left out of the second round of this presidential election. He said he did call on his supporters to back Macron, but said that their fight was not over and they still had more to do, and it doesn't mean if Macron does succeed that he is off the hook, that they will continue to fight for diversity. And we're showing you now live pictures from Paris at Macron's headquarters, where they're expecting Macron to speak any moment now. But for now, we will cross back to the studio where we will have more analysis. And for those of you just joining us, this is Euronews' special coverage of the French presidential election. You can also follow us online at euronews.com and follow our live blog. But stay tuned for the studio.
La suite de notre soirée spéciale consacrée à l'élection présidentielle.
So we continue our special coverage on the French presidential election. Now let's take a look at the traditional parties of Valérie Pécresse and the Socialist Party, represented by Anne Hidalgo, both of whom took a real slap in the face from this election. So let's go to Christophe. He's in our studios. And so this show was a terrible defeat.
You're quite right. This is one of the main lessons of the evening, is the collapse of the traditional parties in favor of an anti-system of parties. And if we look at the anti-system parties, they won half of the votes. So what we've seen is that they have eclipsed the socialist parties and other parties. Let's look at the figures of the traditional parties. Anne Hidalgo, whose Socialist Party didn't even reach 2% of votes. And even the Communist Party did better than she did. And then we have Pécresse with 4.7%. She won't even be refunded her campaign costs, which gives you an idea of the state of the situation. So let's look at what happened to the Socialist Party in the past 20 years. This is the third time This is the third time that they lost in the first round. In 2002, you might remember, this was the first major upset and disaster for the Socialist Party. Leon Jospin, Prime Minister, was ejected out of the first round. He was beaten by Le Pen, who then faced off with Jacques Chirac. This was after
et c'est l'effondrement. Le candidat socialiste Benoît Hamon qui termine avec moins de 7% des suffrages.
Who was performing very poorly.
Ce soir de la maire de Paris.
And then represented the socialists. And here again, we have Hidalgo doing even worse than the others.
Christophe Garage, donc pour cette analyse sur ces revers électoraux.
Thank you, Christophe, for that analysis on this disastrous night for the traditional two parties in France's political sphere. We're now waiting for Emmanuel Macron to speak. He's come out at first, according to the exit poll, and we now have Marine Le Pen, who's also made it to the second round. Now, we have a profile on Marine Le Pen. Let's take a look.
It was in 2012, just 10 years ago, when Marine Le Pen ran in her first presidential election, obtaining 18% of the votes in the ballot, the best score in the history of her party, the National Front, in her first round. A party her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, had founded in 1972, and who she replaced as leader in 2011. It was by her father's side that Marine Le Pen took her first steps in politics. Even if today the relationship between the founder of the National Front and the leader of what is now known as the National Rally are no longer on good terms. The former lawyer really entered the arena in 1993. She ran for the parliamentary elections in Paris, but was defeated. The first victory she obtained came 5 years later, with a successful election as regional councillor for Hauts-de-France. From 1998, Marine Le Pen attained several local mandates. In 2004, for the first time, she was elected to the European Parliament, where she remained for 13 years. In 2017, 15 years after her father, Marine Le Pen managed to lift the far right to the second round of a presidential election. Beaten by Emmanuel Macron, the National Front candidate still collected more than 34.2% of the vote. In her campaign, she makes 22 pledges, a programme driven mainly by its fight against immigration. On the thorny issue of Europe, Marine Le Pen has changed course. If leaving the European Union is no longer on the agenda, the National Rally candidate remains forthright in her views. But before that, Marine Le Pen will have to overcome the challenge of this third presidential election. If she succeeds, she will become the first woman to be elected president of the French Republic. It would also be the first time the far right would seize power in France.
And let's take you now to back to the Republic En Marche's headquarters in Paris, where the crowd is waiting for Emmanuel Macron to come out on stage and speak to his supporters. We've just heard there from a kind of profile of Marine Le Pen. She's been in politics for quite some time, as the report kind of showed us. This is not a kind of debutante to politics in France, really. For a long time, she struggled to reinvent the image of her party. Her party used to be called the Front National, the National Front. It now even has a new name, the Rassemblement National. And for a long time, she's tried to detoxify the nature of her party from one of intense anti-immigration and sometimes open anti-Semitism to one that is much more focused not only on immigration and issues of sovereignty, but also, as we've seen in the last few weeks, a cost of living crisis that's affecting French citizens, how the war in Ukraine is feeding through to normal people through higher prices on food, higher prices on petrol, the fact that often wages have not, in many sectors, have not kept up with those rising prices. And it's a message that's really chimed. However, as we've seen from every single concession speech, bar that of the other far-right candidate, Eric Zemmour, in every single concession speech, the losing candidate, or the candidate that's likely to lose, has said, don't vote for Marine Le Pen. Do not do it just to protect our republic and our democracy. And it's a message so far that, well, if successful, would deny Marine Le Pen a second chance.
And we can see here live pictures from Paris. Crowds have started waving their flags erratically. It appears that perhaps Emmanuel Macron is about to speak. We can see photos here of teams gathering. We know it's him and Marine Le Pen who will go through to the next round in the French presidential election. A result many had predicted, but it was an extremely close call. We did just hear from Marine Le Pen, whose team was equally excited. She was promising to put France back on the map, promising to address migration, promising healthy pensions for everyone, and she was also promising education and equality. However, we have heard from conceding speeches such as the Greens, they don't think diversity or environmentalism or equality will make it through to the second round. And we've also heard from the far left, who says France is left with a choice of picking from two different types of evils. But so far, all of the conceding candidates have called on, except for Eric Zemmour, have called on their supporters to back Macron in the next round of the presidential election, which begins on April 24. Now, the second round campaign does start tomorrow, and much of that will depend on how the 47% or so of voters who did not cast their ballots for either Macron or Le Pen in the first round will decide how to vote. As we can see here, we're back in Paris. We are waiting to hear from Macron. He will be talking at any moment now. What else can we expect, Raoul?
Well, it's obviously going to be quite a triumphalist speech, you'd imagine, from Macron. As we've talked about previously, the polls were definitely tightening before this first round. Some exit polls in Belgium and Switzerland were saying that, even Le Pen might have been even ahead of Macron in the first round. So the fact that there is a projected 5% gap between the two candidates is going to be a source of real enthusiasm, and Macron is going to want to at least to show that to his supporters and to the rest of France and the world. Nonetheless, it is only 5%, and it's increasingly looking likely that Le Pen might better her 2017 attempt that she made for the second round, where she only got about mid-30s of percentage. Macron will have to really now rally not just those people who support him, but the people who didn't support him, more importantly. That is the key thing he must do for the second round.
Yes, we do know that his party, earlier we heard from our correspondent Annalise Borges say that they were expecting 30%. But nonetheless, they are thrilled with the result. As you mentioned earlier, it was quite close with Le Pen in early polls were suggesting. But it is important to remind everyone that these are exit polls that we have so far, that we have received so far. And we did hear from the Republican candidate. She was one of the first candidates with a conceding speech, and she was saying that Macron really did a disservice by not appearing to campaign heavily. And this is obviously because he was preoccupied with Ukraine. So how do you think that has impacted his campaign, and what does he need to do next?
At the start, it definitely worked for him, I think. It led to a bounce in the polls for him, quite a considerable bounce in the polls, as he could, he was on the news quite a bit. He could appear like a statesman who was acting to defend the interests of France and wider Europe. But in the last 2 weeks of the campaign, it hasn't really done him any favours. The poll bounce that he got at the start of the war, at the start of during February the 24th, when the invasion began, has now been largely eroded, and he's back to where he was before Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's partly the idea that while the war is still shocking, it's now not new. We've been at the war in Ukraine has now been going on for almost 2 months, and many French electors are worried about everyday bread and butter issues, we could say, like the cost of living, like immigration, certainly for members of or supporters of Marine Le Pen's party, like security, like issues to do with Europe, and Macron has been rather absent from that. He's given one kind of televised interview, and that's it. He notably didn't take part in any of the debates on French national TV, whereas all of the other candidates did, which put him in a considerable position of criticism from all candidates of all political stripes. I think it added to his Jupiterian image, this idea that he's larger than life and that he's a god, which is an image that many people have, or a nickname or phrase that many people over the last 5 years have wanted to use against Macron. It's also really interesting to see now what those who didn't vote for Macron will do, because there is a lot of antipathy towards him. It's a very different situation than we were at in 2017. Macron back then, while he had held ministerial posts, was a somewhat less known quantity. He hadn't been in the presidential seat. He hadn't been taking the big decisions for 5 years like he has now. And in those 5 years of pandemic, but also of incredibly difficult times in France through much change, he's alienated a significant portion of the public. There's many people I know in France who, while they're quite anti-Le Pen, they said they'll never vote for Macron given his record. It looks like we're now seeing, just through the distance at the headquarters of Emmanuel Macron in France, there he is greeting members of the crowd with his wife, Brigitte Macron.
Big smiles there from Emmanuel Macron. He will be going up against Marine Le Pen for the second time in the French presidential election. He's taking to the stage now. His supporters are clearly excited.
They're all chanting 5 years more. Let's now tune into what he has to say. 5 years more, the crowd is chanting. 5 years more.
Merci beaucoup.
Now we'll hear from President Emmanuel Macron. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dear friends, dear compatriots,
mes chers compatriotes de métropole, d'outre-mer et de l'étranger, ce dimanche 10 avril,
the overseas territories and metropolitan France. Today, over 36 million of you have gone out to vote. You have gone out to go out and to vote in the same way as many previous generations have before you. And above all, I would like to say thank you to all our compatriots who, as of the first round, have decided to vote for me as candidate. Thank you.
Leur confiance, votre confiance, m'honore,
your trust
et m'engage.
Honors me, obliges me, and engages me. All of you, ladies and gentlemen, you may count on me to implement this project towards progress, independence, progress, and European and French independence that we have defended throughout this campaign.
Je veux aussi remercier.
I would also like to say thank you.
Quelques-uns sont là ici ce soir à mes côtés.
Thank you to all those, some who are alongside me, who have over the last few years have given so much of their time and energy throughout the country. You have given your energy. You've worked so hard. You've worked during the night time, the daytime. I notice how much I owe you, and I thank you for that. The crowd there is shouting, Macron president, Macron president.
Et j'appelle tous ceux qui, depuis 6 ans et jusqu'à ce soir,
He continues,
se sont engagés
I would
à
like
travailler à
to
mes
call
côtés,
on those
à transcender
who
leurs
have committed
différences,
to work alongside me for the past 6 years. You have all overcome your differences to gather together to become one unified political movement to unify our country.
Je veux saluer l'ensemble des candidats présents au premier
I would
tour.
also like to thank all of the candidates who have been present for the first round.
Yannick Jadot, Jean Lassalle, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Valérie Pécresse, Philippe Poutou, Fabien Roussel et Éric Zemmour. Merci à toutes et tous ce soir une fois encore.
Thank you to all the candidates this evening who have once again, please applaud them all for their efforts.
Parce que depuis le début et depuis toujours,
because right from the outset and right from the beginning, we are here to defend the beliefs that we believe in very strongly. And we wish to show respect to each individual, each man, each woman that we are competing with.
Je sais la déception des candidates et candidats dont je viens ici.
I know how disappointed some candidates whose names I've just mentioned must be. And the same must be true for those who voted. Our democracy is a rich democracy thanks to those who have committed to their ideas passionately. And thank you to those citizens who have supported their ideas.
Et je remercie Anne Hidalgo, Yannick
I would like to thank
Valérie Pécresse et Fabien Roussel.
I would like to thank our candidates, the candidates who have already this evening have provided me with their support.
J'invite solennellement nos concitoyens.
I would like to solemnly invite our fellow citizens, whatever their political beliefs and whatever their choice was for the first round, to join us.
Certains le feront pour faire barrage à l'extrême droite.
Certain people may well do so to block the far right, and I am fully aware that this will not necessarily mean that they will supply support for me and my projects, and I respect that. I know this is the decision. I know this is the choice made, for example, by Jean-Luc Mélenchon. But here and now, I would like to simply say thank you to all the candidates for their clarity regarding the far right wing and asking everyone to block the far right wing.
Mais dans ce moment décisif,
in this decisive moment, and for the future of the French nation, nothing must be like it was before. And this is why I would like to hold my hand out and reach out to all those people who wish to work for France. I am ready to invent something new, something that will bring together and take on board all the beliefs and sensibilities so that together we are all able to put together joint action in order to serve our nation for the years to come. That is our duty.
À tous nos compatriotes qui se sont tournés vers l'abstention,
to all of our compatriots, those who decided to abstain during this first round, possibly because they are angry with the inequalities that exist, angry with the insecurities, the lack of securities, or the fact that they find it hard to live because they feel they don't earn enough money, or they feel that we don't listen. I would like to convince all these citizens that our projects are far more sturdy than that of the far right when it comes to responding to their needs. You may count on me.
Car ne nous trompons pas, rien n'est joué.
Because we must get this right. Nothing has yet been decided. The debate that we will have over the next 2 weeks is a debate that will be decisive for our country and Europe.
Voulons-nous d'une France indépendante parce que forte?
Do we want an independent France because our country is strong from a scientific, technological, military, scientific perspective, notwithstanding culture or farming? Or do we want France that provides seriousness for schools, pensions, hospitals, and the state-run services? Is that what we want? Yes, that's what the crowd's shouting. Do we want a France that rises to the challenge of climate change through energy and nuclear and ecological planning? Yes, answer the crowds. Do we want a France that, thanks to equality, the heating bills will eventually drop? Yes, say the crowd. Do we want a fair France for our overseas territories, for mainland France? And do we want a France that, in the face of the crisis currently ongoing and in the future, will continue to trust science, reason, and expertise, as has been the case over recent months and recent years? Yes, the crowd is shouting. I want France, a country that is against Islamic separatism, and a France that through secularism will give people the choice to believe or not to believe, to pursue their religious beliefs, and not France that prevents the Muslims or Jews eating in the way that their religion tells them to. That is not who we are. I want a France that offers progress, the opportunity of progress to everybody, the workers, the families, the young children, women, and notably for single mothers, for those who do not have a stable income. I do not want France that regresses. That is not who we are. I want a country that is part of Europe, that continues to sign agreements, alliances with other countries to defend our interests. I do not want a France that we exit from Europe, we turn our back on our neighbours and become xenophobic and populist. That is not who we are. I would like to see a France that is faithful, France that is loyal. Everybody is shouting, Macron president, Macron president. He continues, I would like to see a country, a France that shows respect for the Enlightenment and for all of our past histories. Dear friends, dear compatriots, the challenges that we are up against regarding the 24th of April are those of the choice that you will make through your vote. You will need to make this choice in 2 weeks' time, and I would simply like to say this evening that I will do everything in my power to convince every single citizen of this country that the only project in favour of purchasing power is our project. The only project that is credible in the fight against everything being too expensive in the country is our project. The only project that is for workers, for all those people who have been left by the wayside in the past is our project. I would also like to stress that the only project for France is ours. I believe in us. I believe in all of us. Whatever our path, whatever our social environment, I believe in all of us, whatever our origins, whatever part of the country we come from, whatever our opinions are, whatever our beliefs are. It is all of us together. That is France. That is our country. So, For the next 2 weeks, we will invest all our time and energy because nothing is yet guaranteed. Let us be humble. Let us be dedicated to convincing absolutely everybody so that on April 24, everyone can choose a new era for France, a European era for France. On the 24th of April, we will choose hope. We will be able to choose France. And also Europe together.
Vive la République et vive la France.
Long live the Republic, long live France.
Je compte sur vous.
So, we've just heard from Emmanuel Macron there. The crowd at his headquarters is currently shouting Emmanuel Macron, and it looks like he'll be in first place in this first round of the presidential election. Jubilant scenes there after his speech to rally his supporters. Now let's cross back to our studio in Lyon for more analysis.
Voilà, vous venez d'entendre le discours d'Emmanuel Macron, le président sortant.
So you just heard the speech from Emmanuel Macron, the French incumbent, who comes out at the front of the voting this first round. And now we move towards the 24th of April, a confrontation with Marine Le Pen. We will now go to Annelies Borges at the headquarters in Paris. So what are some of the main points coming out of Macron's speech?
Well, he was a very lively candidate this evening. Of course, he was very happy with the score this evening, 28%, over 28%. At the same time, he drew attention to the threat of the far right. Nothing's won yet, nothing will be the same again. He talked about reinventing a new model for France, and through a shared effort, he called for people who voted for other candidates in the first round and clearly for those who abstained to vote for him and to come together around him. He said it's important to remain humble and that we can't spare any effort in the next 2 weeks. He called on his supporters to not spare their efforts. They must convince voters of a strong and independent France, a France that can finance its debt at its retirements and that's devoted to science, fighting against Islamic separatism, but at the same time allowing people to continue their religious practices as they wish. He said that France must remain a part of a strong Europe. And he said that his is the only project for a strong France within a strong Europe. He said he'll make every effort to convince voters that his second term of office, he's really only the one who can actually deliver in the next 5 years. He's the only one that can deliver on the projects he began in 2017. Back then, he was the outsider, and he said he was going to reinvent France at the time. Of course, now he represents continuity. He's not exactly the change candidate. So he's very happy, of course. But he said they must be humble in the face of these results. It will take a lot of hard work in these next 2 weeks to convince a lot of the French who didn't vote for him in the first round. As he knows, the battle has just begun for him now.
Thank you so much, Annelies Borges, from Macron's headquarters in Paris. So, the 27 countries of Europe are keeping a close eye on this election. So let's cross to Grégoire Laura with a new guest in Brussels.
Hello, I'm with a researcher at the University of Brussels. So, Macron mentioned Europe several times, and they weren't really present in the first round
You're
of the campaign.
quite right. It's true that Emmanuel Macron noted the defeat of some of the traditional parties, and we know that even if you are convinced European, this is not necessarily a good choice during a campaign.
Alors, un tiers des Français ont voté pour l'extrême droite, donc eurosceptique.
So, we saw that a third of French people voted for the Eurosceptic far right. So what's he going to do?
Well, this is a problem in French politics. We are now seeing the consequences of some of the crises from the previous times during the defeat of the left, of the Socialist Party nearly doesn't exist anymore. So will the far right manage to polarize the national debate with the terrible consequences of Europe? Well, this will play out in the second round, but of course during the legislative elections as well. So given the crises of Europe, what will be the influence be?
Well, it's not just France that's suffering from the crisis in Ukraine. It raises the question of financing European defense and countering the effects of the Ukrainian crisis.
So this evening, can we imagine that these institutions are quite relieved by the results?
Yes, this is good news coming from the first round. And the Franco-German partnership will be certainly relieved. There's definitely difficulties and tensions in Germany.
So would a victory of Emmanuel Macron, would it mean that it would revitalize Europe, that there would be more integration?
Yes, I think so, clearly. This is the political ambition of Emmanuel Macron since he was first elected. He's certainly the heir, one could say, of François Mitterrand, by example.
So if Marine Le Pen wins, how will the European institutions react? And what will they do?
Well, this wouldn't be the first Eurosceptic president in Europe. We've seen this in Great Britain, obviously. And we've also seen it currently in Poland, but also in Hungary as well. So there are Eurosceptic countries within the European Union. So this, of course, wouldn't be new. But it would be an important country, nonetheless, for that to happen to. But most observers recognise that Marine Le Pen would have a hard go.
Well, Marine, what do you think about, after the second round, how Marine Le Pen? Well, that's up to Emmanuel Macron and what he does. So thank you so much for joining us, Christophe.
Thank you, Gregor, for that. And now we'll go to Cyril, who's at the headquarters of the Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen's party. That's in the east of Paris. And she's preparing for a face-off with Emmanuel Macron.
That's right, it's going to be a replay. And well, will it be a replay? So Marine Le Pen, to win, will have to do much better than 2017, where she had only 34% of the votes in the second round. So she's going to have to try to bring together those parties who are hostile to Macron. As you just heard, Emmanuel Macron has asked all those who did not vote for him in the first round to vote for him in the second round. And of course, he talked about purchasing power, which is what Marine Le Pen built her whole entire campaign on. She wants lowering taxes, lowering energy products. She wants a reduction of payroll, taxes, businesses. And you know, there's going to be a debate between the two final candidates, which is very much watched by the French public. And so the French people are already doing their calculations to see who can win votes from the other parties to be able to win. Zemmour had rather a weak score, so even if he called to vote for Marine Le Pen, then we had the far left candidates who called for their voters to not necessarily vote for Emmanuel Macron, but block the far right. So we can say normally the maths works in the favour of the incumbent president Emmanuel Macron. So nonetheless, it's going to be a very intense period between the now and the second round.
So, the populist anti-system of parties have come out stronger than ever before. 23% for Marine Le Pen, 7% for Eric Zemmour. So let's hear from Christophe. So we can see that the far right has had a huge bounce.
That's right. That's the most noted piece of news this evening, is the far right taking strong root in France. This marks a real turnaround. The candidate for the national rally, Marine Le Pen, is for a second time qualified for the second round of the presidential election. So let's look at the latest figures. She won 23.2% of votes. We mustn't forget that we also have Eric Zemmour, who is the troublemaker of the campaign and direct competition of Le Pen, but he only gathered 7%. So together, the two of them represent more than 30% of voters. So that's over 10 million voters. So this rise of the far right is not new. It's part of a long building trend that we've seen in France. Let's look at those trends. You can see in 2002, for the first time, Jean-Marie Le Pen qualified for the second round, beating out the socialist candidate. But then he lost. And then we have his daughter, Marine Le Pen, who qualified for a second time. So in 2017, it was with 21.3%, and now in 2022, it's 23.2%. So that's according to the latest estimates. So now the question is, will the far right, with that strong base, will it be able to win a presidential election? That's the challenge from now until the second round of voting. And it will, of course, be a political tsunami in Europe and France if she does win.
Thank you so much, Christophe, for your analysis on the issue and on the rise of the far right in France and more in general. And now we're going to go back to the newsroom for more analysis on the results.
Good evening and welcome to Euronews' special coverage of the French presidential election. I'm Charlotte Lamb and I'm joined by Raoul San. Now the first exit polls are in and they're showing incumbent President Emmanuel Macron and his rival Marine Le Pen will go up against each other in the second round. Now we've spent the evening hearing from conceding speeches, but just moments ago we heard from Macron himself. He was received by delighted supporters and he was promising everyone to he was calling on those who did not vote in today's first round to come and support him in this second round, vowing to be a president for all, vowing to unite the country. And he said, no matter your political views, that his projects, his vision, and his plans for France were stronger than anything the far right could offer. Now, of course, earlier we did hear from Marine Le Pen, who said that she plans to put France back on the map to make it a wealthy country again. And she said that she wants to tackle immigration and taxes, and she also wants unity and equality. And what else did we hear, Raoul?
Well, I think the nature of his speech was very interesting. It kind of started out in a very conciliatory tone, saying, you know, he feels the sorry of, or the nature of the other candidates who didn't make it through to the second round, but also to the millions and millions of French citizens who also voted for them. It kind of alludes to the fact that he knows he's got a real challenge on his hands, much more so than in 2017, when it was, it must be noted, obviously, the same contest between Macron and Le Pen. This time round, the polls for the second round predicted to be against Macron, between Macron and Le Pen, are much, much closer. In 2017, there was about a 15 or 20 point gap between the two candidates when the second round was actually held. This time round, polls have the two almost at neck and neck. We're talking about 48-52 Le Pen, Macron, or somewhere around that figure. And you could tell that in his speech, because he really reached out to those people saying, look, I know you're upset. I know you didn't get what you wanted tonight, but please give me your vote so we can basically fight against the far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen. And he directly referenced the speech of Jean-Luc Melenchon, who didn't really support Macron so much as rather say don't vote for Le Pen. He knows he's got a difficult situation here, and it's quite a touchy one. Many people, now that they know what Macron is about, don't really want to vote for them, even though they know that they absolutely dislike the far right. It's quite a difficult straw he's got to play here. Will he be able to convince enough disaffected people from the first round who either didn't vote or voted for radically different visions other than Macron to actually come out to the second round? Or will he not? This is the key question here, I think, Charlotte.
That's right. And now we're going to take you to special reports of those two who will go up against each other in the next election, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen.
Five years ago, age 39, Emmanuel Macron became the youngest French president ever elected. He promised to renew political life and overcome the left-right divide. 5 years later, the image of the former minister, close to the socialists, has changed. His term in office is being marked by a number of challenges, including that of the Gilets jaunes, a populist movement inspired by rising fuel costs in 2018, and sometimes accused of being racist and far-right. In a country weakened by 2 years of a global pandemic, there's a degree of disillusionment for those who hoped for social and ecological changes. Environmental groups say that in this regard, he has been found wanting. The incumbent president entered the electoral campaign late, as his role as mediator in the conflict reinforced his presidential stature, benefiting in the polls from what some people call the rally around the flag effect. But as the election approached, concerns about domestic politics and above all about purchasing power have taken over. And as the re-election campaign nears its end, a row has emerged over the government's use of private advisors. During one of his first meetings, only a week before the first round, he warned against the contamination of the debate by the far right.
We've become complacent, but the extremist danger today is all the greater because for several months, no, several years, hatred and alternative truths have become trivialized in the public debate.
5 years ago, Emmanuel Macron said he wanted to do everything possible to prevent further need to vote for the extremes. But 5 years later, he's holding off a far-right surge. It was in 2012, just 10 years ago, when Marine Le Pen ran in her first presidential election, obtaining 18% of the votes in the ballot, the best score in the history of her party, the National Front, in her first round. A party her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, had founded in 1972, and who she replaced as leader in 2011. It was by her father's side that Marine Le Pen took her first steps in politics. Even if today the relationship between the founder of the National Front and the leader of what is now known as the National Rally are no longer on good terms. The former lawyer really entered the arena in 1993. She ran for the parliamentary elections in Paris, but was defeated. The first victory she obtained came 5 years later, with a successful election as regional councillor for Hauts-de-France. From 1998, Marine Le Pen attained several local mandates. In 2004, for the first time, she was elected to the European Parliament, where she remained for 13 years. In 2017, 15 years after her father, Marine Le Pen managed to lift the far right to the second round of a presidential election. Beaten by Emmanuel Macron, the National Front candidate still collected more than 34.2% of the vote. In her campaign, she makes 22 pledges, a programme driven mainly by its fight against immigration. On the thorny issue of Europe, Marine Le Pen has changed course. If leaving the European Union is no longer on the agenda, the National Rally candidate remains forthright in her views. But before that, Marine Le Pen will have to overcome the challenge of this third presidential election. If she succeeds, she will become the first woman to be elected president of the French Republic. It would also be the first time the far right would seize power in France.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, mes amis, mes chers compatriotes. Merci. Mes chers compatriotes de métropole, d'outre-mer et de l'étranger, ce dimanche 10 avril, vous avez été plus de 36 millions à faire valoir ce droit conquis par les générations précédentes, qui est le droit de vote. Et je remercie tous nos compatriotes qui, dès le premier tour, ont porté leur suffrage sur ma candidature. Merci. Leur confiance, votre confiance, m'honore, m'oblige et m'engage. Vous pouvez, toutes et tous, compter sur moi pour mettre en œuvre ce projet de progrès, d'ouverture et d'indépendance française et européenne que nous avons défendu tout au long de cette campagne. Je veux aussi remercier toutes celles et ceux, quelques-uns sont là ici ce soir à mes côtés, qui durant ces dernières années ont tant donné, partout sur le territoire. Vous avez donné votre énergie, votre travail, vos jours et vos nuits. Je sais ce que je vous dois. Merci. Et j'appelle tous ceux qui, depuis 6 ans et jusqu'à ce soir, se sont engagés pour travailler à mes côtés, à transcender leurs différences pour se rassembler en un grand mouvement politique d'unité et d'action pour notre pays. Je veux saluer l'ensemble des candidats présents au premier tour, Nathalie Arthaud, Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, Anne Hidalgo, Yannick Jadot, Jean Lassalle, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, Valérie Pécresse, Philippe Poutou, Fabien Roussel et Éric Zemmour. Merci à toutes et tous ce soir, une fois encore, de les applaudir. Merci beaucoup. Parce que depuis le début et depuis toujours, nous défendons des convictions avec force, mais en respectant chacune et chacun. Merci pour cela. Je sais la déception des candidates et candidats dont je viens ici d'évoquer le nom et celle de leur soutien comme de leurs électeurs. Notre démocratie, en effet, est riche de tous les engagés qui défendent leurs idées avec force et passion. Merci à eux. Et je remercie Anne Hidalgo, Yannick Jadot, Valérie Pécresse et Fabien Roussel qui m'ont dès ce soir apporté leur soutien. J'invite solennellement nos concitoyens, quelle que soit leur sensibilité et quel qu'ait été leur choix au premier tour, à nous rejoindre. Certains le feront pour faire barrage à l'extrême droite. Et je suis pleinement conscient que cela ne vaudra pas soutien du projet que je porte, et je le respecte. Je sais que c'est le choix fait, par exemple, par Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Mais je veux ici saluer leur clarté à l'égard de l'extrême droite et pour faire barrage à l'extrême droite. Mais dans ce moment décisif pour l'avenir de la nation, plus rien ne doit être comme avant. C'est pourquoi je souhaite tendre la main à tous ceux qui veulent travailler pour la France. Je suis prêt à inventer quelque chose de nouveau pour rassembler les convictions et les sensibilités diverses afin de bâtir avec eux une action commune au service de notre nation pour les années qui viennent. C'est notre devoir. À tous nos compatriotes qui se sont tournés vers l'abstention ou le vote extrême, soit parce qu'ils sont en colère face aux inégalités qui persistent, aux désordres écologiques, à l'insécurité du quotidien, à la difficulté de vivre dignement même quand on travaille dur, soit parce qu'ils se sentent insuffisamment représentés, écoutés, associés. Je veux les convaincre dans les jours à venir que notre projet répond bien plus solidement que celui de l'extrême droite à leurs peurs et aux défis du temps. Comptez sur moi. Car ne nous trompons pas, rien n'est joué. Et le débat que nous aurons dans les 15 jours à venir est décisif pour notre pays et pour l'Europe. Voulons-nous d'une France indépendante, parce que forte sur le plan scientifique, technologique, économique et militaire, agricole et culturel. Voulons-nous d'une France qui, par le plein emploi et par le sérieux, est capable de financer son État-providence, nos retraites, notre école, notre hôpital et nos services publics? Voulons-nous d'une France qui relève le défi climatique et écologique par le nucléaire, les énergies renouvelables, la sobriété énergétique et la planification écologique? D'une France où, par l'écologie, les factures de chauffage se réduiront et la voiture électrique pour tous viendra remplacer les coûteux pleins d'essence? Voulons-nous d'une France plus juste pour nos outre-mer, pour tout le territoire, pour notre hexagone? Voulons-nous d'une France qui, face aux crises en cours et à venir, continue à faire confiance à la science, à la raison, à la compétence, comme nous l'avons fait ces derniers mois et ces dernières années? Je veux une France qui lutte résolument contre le séparatisme islamiste, mais qui, par la laïcité, permette à chacun de croire ou de ne pas croire, d'exercer son culte. Et pas une France qui empêche les musulmans ou les juifs de manger comme le prescrit leur religion, ce n'est pas nous. Je veux une France qui porte des progrès pour chacun, pour nos aînés, pour nos enfants, pour les travailleurs, pour les familles, pour les femmes et notamment les mères seules, pour les précaires. Pas une France de la régression pour tous, ce n'est pas nous. Je veux une France qui s'inscrit dans une Europe forte, continue de nouer des alliances avec les grandes démocraties pour se défendre. Pas d'une France qui, sortie de l'Europe, n'aurait pour seuls alliés que l'internationale des populistes et des xénophobes. Ce n'est pas nous.
Cette soirée spéciale consacrée à l'élection présidentielle française touche à sa fin. On vous rappelle.
Welcome back to France's special Euronews' special coverage of the presidential election.
Pour le second tour, appelons le résultat.
Just to recap, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen will go head-to-head in the second round of polling for the French presidential election.
Dans 2 semaines, le 24 avril. J'en profite pour remercier tous nos correspondants.
I'd like to say thank you very much to all of our correspondents, all 3 of them from the headquarters of the candidates in Paris, our correspondents Grégoire Laure in Brussels, and also thank you, Anne, for everything revolving social media, and Christophe Garish, thank you for your analysis. Thank you to our technical teams, our newsroom teams, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time for the ending of this French presidential election. Thank you very much and good night.
The night started off jubilantly for Macron and his supporters, projected at 28% of the exit polls, projected polls. Jubilant scenes there in Paris as Macron took to the stage to address his supporters and rally them to the second round, which will be held on the 24th of April, and one which he will need to gain all of the votes from those who didn't vote for him, for those who voted for radically other different versions than Macron.
More than 36 million of you have voted, and I would like to say thank you. Thank you to all of our fellow citizens who, as of the first round, decided to grant their vote to my candidacy.
And as we can see here, Macron was projected with over 28% of the vote, compared to his nearest challenger, 23% for Madame Le Pen, Marine Le Pen of the Rassemblement National. That gap was wider than predicted, but still rather too short to be certain of a Macron victory in the second round. Many polls have predicted that the two would be neck and neck in the first round, and some polls even predicted that Marine Le Pen would be ahead slightly. But as you can see from these jubilant pictures, when she took the stage, she was radiant with joy.
Dear French people from mainland France, around the world and overseas territories, you have voted and given me the honour to be in the second round, facing the incumbent, Mr. Emmanuel Macron. I would simply like to say to the millions of voters who have entrusted their vote on me, how thankful I am. I feel very humble, and I measure the extent that I am now responsible before you. And I hope that we manage to turn around the country through this first round of elections. The citizens have decided to vote, mine and Macron's.
And let's look at the other candidates now. Jean-Luc Melenchon, the candidate of the extreme left, on 21% of the vote, and Eric Zemmour, the candidate of the far right, on 7% of the vote. In his speech, Melenchon phrased the battle now between two evils, really, saying that his supporters shouldn't vote for Marine Le Pen, but not really endorsing Emmanuel Macron that strongly either. As he took to the stage, he sought to cast away the idea that it was a failure for the night for his supporters and that it was success.
La lutte continue.
The fight goes on. The fight goes on.
Nous disons à tous ceux qui jusque-là n'ont pas voulu l'entendre.
We say to all those who have up until now not wanted to hear this, that we are in France. We have a strategy, a popular strategy, a program, other elections ahead of us.
And also taken to the stage was Eric Zemmour, the far-right candidate. He was in a consolatory mood, but said he had built a movement.
Dear fellow citizens, dear friends, over 2 million of you have cast your vote in my favour today. Above all, I would like to speak to you directly, and I would like to say thank you. A very big thank you to you for your trust, your strength that you have given me this evening.
And some of the other candidates here as well. Valérie Pécresse on just under 5%. The ecologist candidate on just under 5% as well. And some of the other candidates listed there too. Valérie Pécresse at times was polling higher than Le Pen, but only could manage just under 5% here. And lastly, the last remaining four candidates, notably Anne Hidalgo from the Party Socialist, one of the two main behemoths of French politics, couldn't even manage 2%. This was the election that really destroyed the dominance in French politics of the Republican Right Party and the Party Socialist.
And we know the abstention rate is likely to prove crucial in this election. It was at 26.2%, according to French pollsters. That's higher than in the previous 2017 first round, but not at the 2002's record level